Why was everyone staring, but no one saying a word? The morning sun beat down across the parade ground, washing the rows of soldiers in blinding gold and white. Flags snapped in the dry wind, medals glinted, and boots stood perfectly aligned on hot asphalt that shimmered like steel. It was supposed to be a simple change of command ceremony, the kind of ritual the military performed with clockwork precision, where order and respect were measured in salutes and silence. But today, silence had taken on a different meaning. At the center of the formation stood a woman, still, calm, precise. Her name wasn't on the lips of anyone present yet. She wasn't supposed to be noticed, but her stillness drew every eye. And then came his voice. "Who is this supposed to be? My new aide." The words cracked across the air like a rifle shot, loud, mocking, dripping with that cruel humor only the powerful use when they think no one will answer back. Brigadier General Marcus Thorne, decorated, loud, and convinced that volume equaled authority. He stood broad-chested, square-shouldered, his ribbons and badges glinting like armor. His words carried the confidence of a man who had never once been told he was wrong, at least not in public. He gestured at her, the small figure standing motionless beside the base commander. "You must be joking, Colonel. She looks like she just graduated high school." Laughter rippled weakly through the ranks, the kind of laughter that wasn't joy, just fear disguised as amusement. Officers forced polite smiles. A few junior lieutenants chuckled louder than they should have, eager to prove loyalty to the loudest man in the room. The rest kept their eyes forward, pretending they heard nothing. The woman didn't move, didn't even blink. Her breathing was steady, her gaze fixed somewhere on the horizon as if the insult hadn't even reached her. Colonel David Chun, the base commander, watched in silence. He'd seen plenty of ego in his 30 years, but what he saw in her eyes, or rather, what he didn't see, made him pause. There was no flicker of irritation, no tension in her jaw, not even the subtle micro-expression of embarrassment most people couldn't hide. It wasn't indifference. It was something deeper, centered, controlled. He'd seen that posture before, in people who'd seen too much, done too much, and learned long ago that emotion was a luxury. And in that moment, a thought crossed his mind like static. I've seen that name before. A classified file, one with more redactions than text. Late one night, under restricted clearance, he had read just enough to know the name was associated with something extraordinary. Something buried under layers of security so deep that most colonels would never know it existed. Evelyn Reid. But the general didn't know that. He saw a woman, quiet, expressionless, wearing an unadorned uniform that looked out of place next to his theater of polished authority. To him, silence was weakness. Humility was submission, and her stillness, insolence. He took a step closer, boots echoing against the concrete, his shadow sliding across her shoes. "I asked a question, Lieutenant," he spat, deliberately demoting her with his words. "What is your function here? Who authorized a staff aide to stand on my line? This is a place for warriors, not secretaries." The crowd stiffened. Still, she didn't answer. That silence was heavier than any word could have been. For most people, silence feels like defeat. For her, it was precision, control. She cataloged everything: the angle of his shoulders, the air temperature, the position of the nearest armed guard, the rhythm of his breath, the exact timing of his steps. Her body was relaxed, but her awareness sharpened to a blade's edge. Colonel Chun recognized it instantly. That calm wasn't arrogance. It was muscle memory. He'd read the phrase once in that blacked-out file. Operator displays preternatural calm under extreme duress. And right now, that description was standing 6 feet from a general who had no idea what kind of storm he was walking into. Thorne misread everything. He always had. To him, silence was resistance, and resistance needed correction. His face hardened. "Answer me when I speak to you." He moved, a sudden, sharp motion, his hand darting out toward her shoulder. Not a punch, not even a shove, but an act of physical dominance. A gesture meant to humiliate, to remind everyone watching that he was in control. And that's when everything changed. It happened in less than a heartbeat. Her body shifted, not in a defensive flinch but with purpose. A pivot of her left foot, a soft rotation of her hips. Her right hand rose not to strike but to meet his wrist. It was impossibly subtle, more like a dancer adjusting a partner's balance than a soldier countering aggression. Her fingers made contact, not grabbing, not wrenching, just guiding. And suddenly his arm wasn't his own anymore. His momentum folded in on itself. His balance vanished. His polished shoes scraped the concrete as he stumbled, not quite falling but utterly off-center, blinking in shock at how he'd lost control without pain, without effort, without even understanding what had just happened. The air on the parade ground went still. Every sound, the hum of engines in the distance, the snap of flags, even the wind seemed to vanish. 1,000 soldiers held their breath. In less than a second, the balance of power shifted completely. The general froze, his arm tingling with numb disbelief. She had already returned to parade rest, her uniform perfect, her eyes forward, no trace of emotion. It was as if nothing had happened. And that made it terrifying. He stared at her hand, the same hand that had redirected him like a child swatting a fly. No bruises, no aggression, just control. Absolute, effortless control. Colonel Chun didn't move. He wanted to let the silence do its work. He could feel it, the slow unraveling of authority. Every soldier in that formation had just witnessed something their minds were still struggling to process. Thorne's power had evaporated. He straightened his jacket, forcing a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Colonel," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "remove this person from the stage. Her conduct is insubordinate." Chun stepped forward. The rhythm of his boots was deliberate, calm, final. He didn't look at the general. He looked at her. For a long moment he said nothing, only studying her posture, her breathing, her quiet, unflinching presence. There was something almost sacred in the way she stood there. Then he turned to the formation. His voice carried low, clear, unwavering. "Sergeant Major." A man who had seen 3 decades of combat snapped to attention. "Sir." "Get me the Omega file." The words rippled through the ranks like an electric shock. Omega. It wasn't standard terminology. It was the kind of word whispered in classified corridors, belonging to operations that officially didn't exist. The kind of word only a handful of people in the entire chain of command were ever meant to hear. The sergeant major didn't question it. He moved with purpose, vanishing into the building beyond the parade ground. The wait was short, but it stretched like eternity. The general's face flushed red, his jaw clenching, trying to reclaim composure. The soldiers shifted slightly, uncomfortable in the unbearable quiet. Chun stayed still, a wall between the general and the woman. He scanned the crowd slowly, meeting the eyes of officers who had laughed earlier. His look wasn't angry, just disappointed. The kind of disappointment that digs deeper than any reprimand. When the sergeant major returned, he wasn't carrying a folder but a secure military tablet. He handed it to Chun without a word. The colonel took it, turned it on, and looked directly at Thorne. "General," he said quietly, "in our line of work, assumptions are dangerous. We assume that volume equals command, that medals equal competence. But sometimes," he glanced at her, "sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous one here." He tapped the screen. "This is Major Evelyn Reed," he said, his voice carrying to the edges of the crowd. "Not a lieutenant, not an aide, a field-grade officer assigned directly under Joint Special Operations Command." The general blinked. Major." But Chun continued, his tone steady, reverent. "Operational designation, Phantom, Tier 1 Special Mission Unit, hand-to-hand instructor, Fort Bragg, Senior Tactical Planner, JSOC, 2,000 recorded combat hours in denied zones, Bronze Star for Valor 4 times, Silver Star twice, Distinguished Service Cross. The words hung in the air like a verdict. No one spoke, not a breath, not a shuffle. Even the wind seemed to have stopped to listen. The general's face drained of color. Chun's gaze sharpened. Under Presidential Order 74 Alpha, she holds mission-level advisory authority. Effective immediately, her command supersedes yours, Brigadier. Then, with precision that sent a visible shiver through the ranks, Colonel Chun turned to her, drew himself upright, and saluted, perfect, crisp, unwavering. "Major Reed," he said, voice thick with emotion, "on behalf of this command, I apologize for your reception." The sound of his hand hitting his brow echoed like a gunshot. She didn't respond, didn't need to. She returned the salute, slow, deliberate, her expression unchanged. But something in that moment, that silent acknowledgement, said everything words never could. The ceremony ended minutes later, in an awkward blur of protocol. But the true event had already happened. No one would forget the sound of that salute. And by the time the soldiers returned to their barracks, a new legend had begun to take shape. They would talk about it for years, how a single silent movement had rewritten the meaning of respect, how a woman no one noticed became the standard by which they'd measure true strength. But none of them knew what was coming next, because what she came to Fort Sheridan for hadn't even begun yet. And there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Not yet. Those two words lingered in her mind as the echo of the ceremony faded behind her. The sound of marching boots, the drone of dismissal orders, the hum of distant engines, they all dissolved into a low, indistinct murmur. Major Evelyn Reed walked away from the parade ground without a word, the weight of eyes following her like invisible gravity. She didn't turn around. She never did. Inside the command building, the air was cooler, dimmer. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above spotless linoleum floors. A few officers glanced up as she passed, not out of curiosity anymore, but something closer to awe or maybe unease. They had all seen what happened. Word would spread. It always did, but Reed wasn't thinking about them. Her boots made no sound. Years of habit, every step controlled, quiet, efficient. She navigated the sterile hallways like a ghost who had walked them 1,000 times. The door to her temporary office opened with a soft hiss. It was small, windowless, the kind of space used for compartmentalized intelligence briefings. On the table lay a single encrypted terminal, a closed metal case, and a stack of unmarked folders. She set her cap down carefully. Then, for the first time since the ceremony began, she let out a slow, controlled breath. The stillness of the room felt heavy, but in a way she understood solitude was the only luxury she allowed herself anymore. A low electronic tone blinked from the terminal. She sat, eyes scanning the lines of code as they decrypted. The message header read, Directive 47S Operation Sundown, Phase 2 Assessment, Immediate Eyes Only. She already knew what it meant. She had been pulled here not to witness a change of command, but to prepare the base for something no one else had clearance to even suspect. And she would have preferred it stayed that way. But the incident outside, that was a problem. Public exposure, attention, those were dangerous things for someone like her. She pressed a fingertip to her temple, the faint trace of fatigue brushing the edges of her concentration. It wasn't physical tiredness. It was the weight of years lived in constant readiness. The kind of exhaustion that came from too many decisions where the wrong choice didn't cost paperwork, it cost lives. A voice from the doorway broke her stillness. "Ma'am." Colonel David Chun stood there, his cap under one arm, his face etched with quiet remorse and a deep respect that hadn't been there that morning. "Permission to enter." She didn't look up right away. "Granted." He stepped in and closed the door behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with the memory of the parade ground, the disbelief, the silence, the salute that had rewritten everything. "I wanted to say," he began, his tone steady but low. What happened out there that shouldn't have happened? Thorne's behavior was unacceptable. Her eyes stayed on the screen, scanning the intelligence feed. It was predictable. Chun frowned slightly. Predictable. Yes. She turned the screen off and finally looked at him. Her gaze was calm, clinical, but not cold. People like Thorne are built on assumption. They equate noise with strength. When they meet silence, it unnerves them. He nodded slowly. You handled it well. It was handled, she corrected softly. Well or not is irrelevant. Chun gave a small exhale, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. The entire base is talking about you. They're calling you Phantom. Reed blinked once. That name wasn't meant for public use. I know, but you can't stop stories. They spread faster than orders. There was a brief pause. Then she asked, what's the general's status? Thorne been recalled to headquarters. Officially, it's an administrative reassignment. Unofficially, Chun hesitated, his career's done. The Pentagon's already heard. Reed looked away for a moment, her voice distant. Consequences were inevitable. That kind of arrogance doesn't survive contact with truth. Chun studied her. You've seen a lot of that, haven't you? Her silence was answer enough. He shifted his weight, the older soldier in him curious, cautious. Ma'am, if I may, who are you really? Her expression didn't change. You already know the file. I know what's in it, Chun said. But files don't tell you what's inside a person. They list events. They don't explain them. Her eyes drifted toward the far wall, not seeing it, but something beyond it. There's nothing to explain. I'm a soldier. I think you're more than that. No, she said quietly, less. That word hung there, heavy and raw. Chun didn't press. Something in her tone told him that behind that simplicity was a lifetime of buried pain and choices that could never be discussed. I'll make sure the rumors don't get out of control, he offered finally. She nodded once, thank you. When he left, the door clicked softly behind him, leaving her alone again. She sat still for a long while, her thoughts circling the moment outside, the sunlight, the faces, the insult. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded her of something old, something she thought she'd left buried overseas. A memory. A different sun, a desert wind, a convoy that never made it to its destination. And the voice of a commander, not unlike Thorne, shouting orders he didn't understand, pushing his team into a valley she knew was wrong. She had spoken up, quietly, calmly, but he hadn't listened. When the ambush came, it was swift, too swift. The sound of gunfire still echoed in her sleep sometimes, not the chaos but the rhythm of it, the math of survival. She had pulled 3 of them out alive, but 2. Her hand curled slightly on the table, the faintest tremor in her fingers. That was the day she learned silence isn't weakness, it's endurance, the only language left when grief burns words away. The next day, she volunteered for the Special Mission Unit program. And from that moment, Evelyn Reed ceased to exist in the public record. Now, as she sat there years later, the ghosts of that valley whispered in her memory. She wasn't angry at Thorne, not really. She pitied him, because she'd once believed the same lie, that strength came from shouting, from dominance, from being seen. She had learned the truth the hard way. Strength was quiet, invisible, often mistaken for nothing at all. Her terminal chimed again, a new message. Incoming encrypted brief, origin, joint command. She opened it. Situation report, Sundown Phase 2. Objective, evaluate base readiness for rapid deployment. Directive, initiate field assessment under Tier 1 parameters. Timeline 48 hours. Status active. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. She closed the message, rose, and retrieved a small black case from the shelf. Inside was a tablet, a comm's earpiece, and a laminated photo, edges frayed, worn from years of travel. A man and a woman in desert fatigues, both younger, smiling faintly in front of a helicopter. The man's name had been Captain Aaron Lake, her commanding officer once, the one who hadn't made it out of that valley. She looked at the photo for a long moment, her jaw tightening just slightly, then slid it back into the case. The world had moved on, but some debts never expired. 2 hours later, the operations wing of Fort Sheridan was alive with quiet movement. She moved through it like a shadow, her presence sparking an instinctive hush in every room she entered. Intelligence analysts, logistics officers, and training NCOs all seemed to straighten subconsciously when she passed, not out of fear, but out of something deeper: respect. In the briefing room, she projected a satellite feed onto the wall. It displayed a cluster of coordinates, blurred under classified encryption. A major approached one of Chun's men. "Ma'am, are we expecting inspection?" "Assessment," she corrected. "This base is being considered for integration into Joint Command readiness. I'm here to evaluate operational response protocols." He nodded, a little unsure. "Of course, ma'am, we'll have full access available to you." "Good," she said, already walking past him. "Start with the flight line. I'll need to see the readiness reports and personnel rosters for the 9th Operations Group." Behind her, whispers started again, quieter now, reverent. "That's her, Phantom Reed, the one who stopped the general without breaking a sweat." But she wasn't thinking about that moment anymore. Her mind was already building the framework of the operation ahead: supply nodes, communication redundancies, strategic vulnerabilities. Every second of her attention was a weapon sharpened for use. Still, beneath that precision, a flicker of thought lingered, a whisper of unease. Sundown wasn't just a readiness inspection. It was something else, something buried under layers of bureaucracy and half-truths. And deep down, she knew, Fort Sheridan wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of one. There was someone or something coming. And when it arrived, she'd be the only one ready. But there was something she hadn't told Colonel Chun. "Not yet. Not yet." The words echoed faintly in her mind again, though she'd never said them aloud. She didn't have to. They were part of her rhythm, a quiet internal mantra reminding her that truth, like strength, had to be revealed in stages. The wrong word at the wrong time could shift entire outcomes. So she waited, she observed, and she prepared. Fort Sheridan was quieter now. Night had fallen, washing the compound in cold blue light. Floodlamps painted the hangars and motor pools in pale halos. The wind had picked up, carrying the distant metallic hum of the airfield. It was that strange hour between duty and rest, when soldiers went quiet and the weight of the day settled into the concrete. Major Evelyn Reed walked the perimeter alone. No entourage, no escort, just a single figure moving through the dark. Her footsteps were soundless, her posture easy, yet there was purpose in every motion. She wasn't sightseeing. She was measuring, watching the rotation of the guards, timing the vehicle patrols, nodding the blind corners of the floodlights. This wasn't habit. It was instinct. Years of training so deeply ingrained that it felt more like breathing than skill. She paused at the chain-link fence overlooking the western ridge. Beyond it, the landscape stretched out, flat, silent, endless. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, was what she'd been sent to find. Operation Sundown. The name sounded clean, sterile, but the reality behind it never was. No operation ever truly was. The classified directives she'd reviewed on her encrypted terminal earlier weren't about inspection. They were about something moving, something off-record. A signal intercepted from deep inside national territory, coded in a format that didn't belong to any known military system. That was why she was here, not to grade logistics, to confirm a threat, quietly, invisibly. And no one on this base could know. Her earpiece gave a faint click, one she recognized instantly. A secure band transmission. "Phantom Actual, this is Watchtower. Verify status." She tapped the receiver. "Online green." Confirm secure channel. Confirmed. Good, came the voice, filtered through static. It was gravelly, distant, one she hadn't heard in years. You've stirred quite a scene at Sheridan. She said nothing. The voice continued. Word spreading fast. The brass is thrilled. The story's already reached command. They're calling it an incident of cultural correction. Her lips pressed into a faint line. That wasn't my intention. Doesn't matter. Intent rarely survives contact with narrative. A small pause. He added, you've got less than 48 hours. Satellite data suggests an anomalous transmission pattern within Sheridan's secure net. We think it's a leak, possibly internal. Her tone didn't shift. Inside this base. Yes, source unknown, but the encryption signature matches something old, pre-war signal tech. You'll find the terminal, quietly. Understood. The line went dead. She stood still for a long time, eyes scanning the night sky. The moon hung low, hazed by thin cloud. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass of a nearby transport bay, sharp eyes, hair tied back in perfect regulation form, expression unreadable. To anyone watching, she looked like a machine, efficient, detached, perfect. But behind that expression, something stirred. Fatigue, not of body but of soul. For years, she'd lived in the shadows of classified missions, always one step removed from normal life, always invisible, always necessary. She'd forgotten what normal even looked like. The parade ground incident earlier had been a distraction, a reminder that she still existed in the world of people, of perception, of ego, and it had rattled something inside her, something she couldn't quite name. Her mind drifted again, unbidden, to the photo she'd hidden in the black case, the one of her and Captain Aaron Lake. He used to walk like she did now, silent, steady, reading the world with that same unspoken awareness. He had taught her something that stuck longer than any tactical doctrine. The mission isn't just about who wins, it's about who you become when it's over. She had never figured out what he meant. Maybe she didn't want to. A faint crunch of gravel behind her broke the reverie. Instinct turned her half a degree, enough to assess threat, enough to calculate distance. It was Colonel Chun. He stopped a few paces away, hands in his pockets, his tone cautious but familiar. You don't sleep much, do you? Sleep gets in the way of readiness, she said softly. Or maybe readiness gets in the way of being human. She didn't reply. He stepped up beside her, following her gaze out toward the dark ridge. You're looking for something. Always. He studied her profile in the moonlight, that unflinching composure that wasn't hardness, but focus distilled to its purest form. I don't know what they sent you here for, he said quietly, but my people trust you. After what happened today, they'd follow you anywhere. They shouldn't. Why not? Because they don't know what following me costs. Chun frowned slightly, caught off guard by the weight in her voice. Sometimes, she continued, still looking outward, the quiet ones don't want followers. They just don't want anyone else to get hurt doing what they have to do. The colonel's expression softened. You've lost people. We all have, she said, but not all of us keep losing them in our heads. The honesty of that line hit harder than any confession. Chun didn't respond. He didn't have to. They stood in silence, the kind that wasn't awkward, just real. After a while, she turned to him. Colonel, I'll need full access to your comms center tonight. He nodded immediately. I'll clear it. No, quietly. No one outside your direct staff knows. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded again, slower this time. Understood. She walked past him, back toward the operations wing, her figure cutting a quiet path through the floodlit haze. By midnight, she was alone inside the communications hub, the nerve center of the base. Rows of glowing terminals lined the walls, each feeding encrypted data across the defense net. She moved between them like a surgeon, eyes scanning lines of code, decrypting message headers, tracing packet signatures. Most of what she found was ordinary, logistics, orders, maintenance reports. But then she saw it, a small, out-of-place data stream looping through the system. Not malicious, just hidden, subtle. Her fingers flew over the keys, isolating it, unraveling the encryption. The header read, SNDWNORIG code, Delta Classified Archive, 20 years. She froze. That code shouldn't even exist anymore. It was a relic, an encryption method used by Special Activities Division operations long since buried. She had seen it once before. Back in that desert valley. Her heart rate didn't rise, but her breath grew slower, controlled. Someone, somewhere, was using an operational encryption key from a mission that should have died with her team. She decrypted further, and then the screen flashed. Access DNID, tier restricted. She frowned, tier restricted. She was tier 1, nothing should have been locked from her. Unless it wasn't a leak. Unless it was bait. The lights flickered once, then again. Her eyes darted upward, scanning. The hum of the servers deepened, the kind of shift that meant external connection. Someone else was in the system. She yanked the manual override and killed the feed. The screens went dark instantly. Silence returned. And for the first time that day, Evelyn Reed felt something she hadn't felt in years, not fear, but the electric clarity that precedes it. Whatever Operation Sundown was, it wasn't about inspection. It was about containment. And someone on this base was trying to stop her from finding out what. She stood in the darkness, the faint emergency lights painting her in dull red. Every sense sharpened. She could hear the low hum of the backup power grid, the soft creak of the metal vents, the whisper of air through ducts. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the corridor outside. She reached instinctively for her sidearm, stopped halfway. No, that would escalate it too early. Instead, she waited, listening, counting. One set of boots, heavy, male, probably armed. The door handle turned slightly, then stopped. Major Reed, a voice called softly. It was Colonel Chun. Her hand relaxed. Come in. He entered, saw the darkness, and frowned. Power issue. No interference. From where? She looked at him for a long moment. That's what I intend to find out. He nodded slowly, reading her expression. You think this has to do with sundown? I don't think, Colonel, I know. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you need backup? She shook her head once. Not yet. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. Understood, but whatever you're walking into, you're not alone in this. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was she had always been alone in it. That was what being Phantom meant. After he left, she turned the terminal back on manually, running a trace through the residual data cache. The trail was faint, but she caught a fragment of the last source ID before the lockout. It wasn't from outside the network. It was from inside the base. And the authorization tag on it, one she recognized instantly, froze her blood. THORN EMRCUSBGN. Her reflection in the monitor stared back at her, calm, controlled, but beneath the surface, something darker stirred. He wasn't gone. And whatever he had been part of hadn't ended on that parade ground. It had just begun. The name on the screen didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been there. Brigadier General Marcus Thorne had been escorted off base only hours ago, stripped of his authority, his reputation in ruins. His access codes should have been terminated the moment he left the grounds. Yet the system had registered a live authorization from his credentials, time-stamped less than 10 minutes earlier. Evelyn Reed stared at the flickering screen, her reflection a ghost in the glow. Her instincts whispered what logic refused to admit. Thorne hadn't just been arrogant, he'd been hiding something. And she had walked straight into it. Her hand hovered over the terminal for a moment before she disconnected the device completely, isolating it from the network. Then she retrieved a small encrypted drive from her case, a personal backup system used by Tier 1 operatives. She copied the log, sealed it, and shut the machine down. In the quiet hum of the comms room she listened. No footsteps, no sound, just the steady thump of her pulse in her ears. She didn't feel fear, she measured it, categorized it, used it. Something about the timing, the precision of the breach, told her it wasn't random. Whoever had used Thorne's credentials had done so knowing she would find it, which meant one of two things. Either he was still pulling strings from somewhere above her clearance level, or someone wanted her to believe he was. Either way, it was bait. She slipped the encrypted drive into a vest pocket and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, a monotonous hum that filled the long corridor. Her boots echoed softly on the tile as she walked. She could feel the weight of the base pressing in, the unseen eyes, the rumors still swirling about the morning's confrontation. They didn't know what she was doing, but they sensed something had shifted. Soldiers always did. The air felt thicker, the tone quieter, as if the whole installation were holding its breath. When she reached the operations wing, she found Colonel Chun still in his office, the only light a dim lamp reflecting off stacks of paperwork. He looked up as she entered, fatigue shadowing his eyes. "Still at it?" he asked. "So are you," she replied. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit. You look like you've been chasing ghosts." "I have," she said simply, taking the seat. He studied her for a moment, the faint trace of concern cutting through his usually steady composure. "Something happened." She met his gaze. "Your network's compromised. A signal was routed through internal channels using restricted credentials." His posture straightened instantly. "Who's behind it?" She hesitated, the word tasted bitter. "Thorne." Chun's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. His clearance was revoked. I personally signed the termination order." "Then someone reinstated it." He leaned back, exhaling slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You think he's still here?" "I think he never really left." She slid the encrypted drive across the desk. Chun looked at it, then back at her. "What's on it?" "Proof," she said quietly. "Or a trap. I won't know until I decrypt it off-grid." He nodded slowly, processing. "What do you need from me?" "Access to the sub-level archives. Your base has a legacy data vault. I saw the schematic in your infrastructure plan." Chun frowned. "That section's been sealed for years. We use it for long-term storage. Why there?" "Because whoever triggered that signal didn't come through standard systems. They used buried hardware, old channels, the kind that predate network monitoring." He was silent for a moment, then he stood. "I'll take you." They walked in silence through the darkened halls, down stairwells that smelled faintly of oil and concrete dust. The air grew cooler with each level, the lighting dimmer. Somewhere deep below, the hum of generators echoed like a heartbeat. When they reached the vault, Chun keyed in his access code. The heavy steel door unlocked with a groan that echoed down the corridor. Inside was a narrow corridor lined with rows of old computer towers, forgotten filing cabinets, and crates marked with faded stencils. Reed's eyes scanned the room. The faint smell of static and machine oil lingered. She moved slowly, flashlight beams sweeping over layers of dust until she found what she was looking for, a secured console hardwired into a power conduit, blinking faintly. "It shouldn't have been active." "Colonel," she said quietly, "who has access to this?" "No one," Chun replied. "That system hasn't been logged in years. We pulled the personnel records off it ages ago." "Then someone reconnected it manually." She knelt beside the console, fingers moving over the ancient keyboard. The interface booted slowly, archaic code scrolling across the screen. Then it stopped, awaiting a password prompt. She didn't type, she waited. The cursor blinked, once, twice. Then a new line appeared automatically. "Welcome back, Phantom." Her breath caught just for an instant. Chun saw her expression change. "What is it?" She didn't answer, she typed instead. "Who are you?" The reply appeared almost instantly. "A friend, a reminder." She typed again, "Of what?" "Of the cost of silence." Her hand paused on the keyboard. The phrase wasn't random. It was a direct quote. One Aaron Lake had said to her years ago in that desert valley, hours before he died. Her pulse slowed, controlled. She typed carefully, "Identify yourself." Another pause, then, "You already know." The cursor blinked, then the console shut itself off. The screen went black. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The hum of the generator filled the air. Chun finally said, "Someone's playing games." "No," Reed said softly, staring at her reflection in the dark monitor. "They're sending a message." He frowned. "About what?" She rose slowly. "That this isn't over." Back in her quarters later that night, she replayed the moment in her mind. The phrasing, the timing, the access point, none of it could have come from Thorne alone. He wasn't capable of this level of subtlety. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who knew things only she and a handful of people in the entire world should have known. She opened the small case again, staring at the photograph inside. Aaron's smile looked almost foreign now, too bright, too human for the world she lived in. Her thoughts drifted back to that final mission, the screams in the radio, the dust storm, the impossible orders. She remembered dragging his body through the sand, the silence afterward, the way her voice had broken when she'd radioed extraction. That was the last time she had spoken without calculation. And now, years later, his words, "the cost of silence," were following her back into daylight. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The hum of the air vent was steady. The bass outside was quiet, but her mind was alive, calculating, piecing together fragments. Thorne, the Omega file, Operation Sundown, a coded message from a ghost. Something linked them. She pulled up the decrypted segment again from the drive, running a deeper trace offline. A new layer of data appeared, faint but present. Hidden under the code was a timestamp, not of creation but of receipt. Fort Sheridan had been receiving these transmissions for months. Whatever was coming, it wasn't new. It was old, reawakening. Her earpiece buzzed again. This time the tone was softer, internal bass frequency. "Chun. Major, we've got movement. Perimeter sensors just tripped. Unidentified vehicle at the west gate." She stood instantly, armed. "Unknown, security teams on the way." "I'll handle it." She grabbed her sidearm and stepped into the corridor. The base was quiet except for the faint wail of an alarm echoing through the distance. Her strides were quick, deliberate. The night air hit her face as she stepped outside, sharp and cold. Floodlights flickered over the outer fence where a black SUV idled, engine running, no plates. 2 MPs were already there, weapons raised. "Driver, refusing to exit, ma'am," one said as she approached. Reed stepped forward. "Stand down." The MPs hesitated, then lowered their rifles slightly. She moved closer until she was within a few feet of the tinted window. The reflection of her own face stared back at her, ghost-like in the glass. Then the window lowered halfway. Inside sat a man in civilian clothes, face obscured by shadow. He held a small envelope in his hand. Delivery for Phantom. Her heartbeat didn't change, but every nerve sharpened. "Who sent you?" "I don't know, ma'am. I was told to hand this to you directly and leave." She took the envelope carefully. "You can go." The man nodded, put the vehicle in gear, and drove off into the darkness. Reed turned the envelope over. No markings, just a single embossed seal, the insignia of Joint Special Operations Command. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Sundown Phase 3 authorized. Objective, containment protocol." No signature, no context, just those words. Her eyes narrowed. Containment protocol. That wasn't terminology for an enemy operation. It was internal, a euphemism used when the threat came from within. And suddenly, everything aligned. Thorne's arrogance, his attempt to assert control, the Omega designation, the silent transmissions from obsolete systems. Sundown wasn't about readiness. It wasn't about inspection. It was about covering something buried, something they didn't want unearthed. She folded the paper once, slipped it into her pocket, and looked up at the horizon where the SUV had vanished. The wind was rising, carrying the scent of rain and something else, the faint metallic edge of change. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "What did you leave behind, Aaron?" Behind her, the floodlights buzzed louder, and the base alarms cut off suddenly, leaving only silence. The kind that comes before impact. And somewhere deep beneath Fort Sheridan, in the dark corridors of the old vault, a forgotten terminal flickered back to life, displaying one final line of code. Sundown Initiate. The storm never arrived, but the air felt like it wanted to. By dawn, Fort Sheridan had fallen into a strange hush, too orderly, too rehearsed. The sky was a dull, unbroken gray, the kind that made everything look washed out and fragile. The flag on the main pole hung limp. Even the morning formation sounded muted, as if the base itself was waiting for something to happen. Major Evelyn Reed stood alone in her office, the envelope still on her desk. Containment protocol. The phrase echoed like a warning siren only she could hear. In military language, it meant isolation, silence, removal of variables. It meant someone was about to disappear. Her reflection in the monitor looked foreign, calm eyes, composed expression, no trace of what she felt. Inside, she was cataloging possibilities, cause chains, patterns. Who was the variable? Who were they trying to contain? A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. Colonel Chun entered, a mug of coffee in hand, eyes already reading the tension in the room. "You look like someone who's seen the next war before it starts." "Something's moving," she said, "above us." "Define above." She turned the envelope toward him. He read the single sentence, brow furrowing. "Containment protocol," he murmured. "That's internal." "Yes." "Who?" She didn't answer. Understanding flickered across his face. "You think it's you." "I don't think," she said evenly. "The word phantom appeared in a restricted transmission last night. That wasn't random. Someone wanted me to see it. Now an unsigned order appears hours later authorizing containment. If I were them, I'd neutralize the unpredictable element before the real operation starts." Chun set the mug down slowly. "Neutralize how?" She gave a small, tired smile, quietly. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence felt heavier than any alarm. Chun leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing that gets you reassigned." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one that keeps you safe." Her tone wasn't cold. It was protective, almost weary. It reminded him of a field medic trying to stop a soldier from walking into open fire. He shook his head. "You didn't come here to survive, did you?" "I came here to finish something." He saw something flicker behind her eyes, a memory she wouldn't name. She continued, softer now. "Whatever Sundown is, it's not an operation, it's cleanup. They're covering something that predates both of us. I need to know what." Chun nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Then you'll have my quiet cooperation." That word quiet felt like a promise. By afternoon, the sky had deepened into a bruised blue, and Reed moved through the base like a shadow. Her presence no longer startled anyone. It commanded silence. The soldiers who saw her gave small nods of respect, then turned away quickly. They had learned what power looked like when it didn't need to shout. She found herself back in the sub-level corridor, standing before the darkened console that had addressed her by name. Dust still hung in the air. She powered it on again, half expecting the same message to reappear. It didn't, only a single blinking prompt. She hesitated, then typed 3 words, Operation Sundown Origin. For a long time nothing happened. Then slowly, letters began to form. Project initiated year 2004 Site Kandahar Forward Base. Status classified. Her throat tightened. Kandahar, the same region where Aaron Lake had died. She scrolled further. The file opened line by line, most of it redacted, but a few words bled through. Experimental comms array, psychological operations, behavioral conditioning protocols, casualty. Lake A. She froze. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling despite her control. Casualty, not KIA casualty. That word carried weight. It implied injury, survival, uncertainty. Her mind reeled backward, sand, blood, the broken radio, the sound of her own voice calling his name through static. They had told her he was gone. They had shown her the dog tags, but she had never seen the body. The cursor blinked at her like a heartbeat. She typed again, hands steady now. Confirm status Lake A. Classified by Order 74 Alpha. The same order that had brought her here. She leaned back slowly, breath shallow. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. If the operation that had killed Aaron was connected to Sundown, then this wasn't about a new threat. It was about erasing an old one. Her earpiece buzzed, Chun again. Major, we've got a visitor from command. 2 vehicles, no prior notice. Who? Inspector General's office. They're asking for you by name. Her pulse slowed into its familiar, deliberate rhythm. Keep them waiting. She powered the console down, wiped the keyboard, and walked out. When she reached the surface, the air tasted of ozone and tension. 2 black SUVs were parked near headquarters, engines idling. 3 men in civilian suits stood beside them, polished shoes, expressionless eyes, the quiet arrogance of bureaucrats who had the power to end careers with a phone call. The tallest stepped forward, Major Reed. Sir, I'm Agent Rains, Office of Inspector General. These are my associates. We're here to conduct a classified debrief concerning your recent incident and ongoing assignment. Her tone remained neutral. My assignment is ongoing. Debriefing is premature. Rain smiled, the kind that never touched the eyes. Orders change. Chun stepped up beside her. Agent, this base is under my command. No personnel are released without formal clearance. Rains turned slightly toward him. Colonel, our authorization comes from Washington. He handed over a folded document. Signed and verified. Containment Directive, Clause C. Chun read the first line and felt his stomach drop. It named her. Evelyn Reed, immediate extraction. Reason, operational breach risk. Reed watched his face as he read. She didn't need to see the words, she already knew them. It's fine, she said softly. Let me handle it. Chun looked at her, 100 things unsaid behind his eyes. Major, you don't have to. Yes, she interrupted, I do. She turned to Rains. Give me 5 minutes to collect my personal effects. Rains nodded curtly. We'll be waiting. She walked back toward her office, footsteps calm, every movement deliberate. Inside, she closed the door, locked it, and exhaled once. She knew what this was, containment disguised as procedure. Once she got in that vehicle, she would vanish into a network of sealed facilities, her record rewritten, her clearance stripped. She would never find the truth. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the quiet fill her lungs. Then she reached into her vest pocket and pulled out the encrypted drive. It wasn't evidence, it was survival. She tucked it inside the lining of her jacket, where no search would find it. Then she opened the small metal case on her desk. The photograph of Aaron Lake stared up at her, faded but clear. She traced a finger over his face, whispering under her breath, "If you're still out there, I'll find you, even if they bury me for it." Then she straightened, composure returning like armor. When she opened the door, Rains was waiting with 2 escorts. "Ready, Major." "Yes." They led her to the SUV. Chun stood at a distance, jaw tight, arms crossed behind his back. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, an unspoken exchange of trust, of promise. The door shut, the engine started, the convoy rolled toward the outer gate. Inside, Rains typed something into a secure tablet. "For what it's worth," he said casually, "I've read your file, impressive history. Shame it ends like this." Her tone was calm. "It doesn't end here." He glanced at her, smirking faintly. "Optimism, rare trait in your line of work." "Not optimism," she said softly. "Calculation." He frowned slightly. "Meaning?" She met his gaze, eyes steady. "Meaning, if this was really about containment, you wouldn't be talking to me." The car grew silent. The air between them changed, heavy, sharp, like the moment before a trigger pull. Rains looked away first. "Just following orders, Major." "So was everyone," she murmured, "right before everything went wrong." The convoy turned off the main road toward an old training annex near the forest edge, one long abandoned. She recognized it immediately. It had been part of the base's early communication testing grounds, back when analog still ruled. Her pulse remained even, but her thoughts were moving fast. Why here? Why not a secure hangar? Why somewhere no longer on the books? The answer came before the car stopped. Because off-record extractions didn't leave paperwork. The SUV braked hard. The rear door opened. 2 agents gestured for her to step out. She did, calmly, deliberately. The forest beyond the chain fence swayed gently in the wind. In the distance, thunder rumbled, low and hollow. Rain stepped closer. "End of the road, Major." She looked at him, head tilted slightly. "No, beginning." And before he could reply, a voice crackled faintly through her concealed earpiece, a whisper only she could hear. "Watchtower to Phantom. Transmission confirmed. Containment compromised. Proceed with discretion." She didn't smile, but something in her posture changed. Shoulders straightened, eyes sharpened, the faintest glimmer of resolve returning. She whispered back under her breath, barely audible, "Acknowledged." Rains noticed the subtle shift, confusion flickering across his face. "What did you say?" "Nothing," she replied, "just remembering the cost of silence." He didn't understand. He wouldn't. As the storm finally broke, thunder rolling over the forest, Evelyn Reed looked out toward the horizon, gray light breaking through rain, fragments of truth scattered like shrapnel in her mind. Containment had begun. But she wasn't the one being contained. Not yet. The cell wasn't a cell, not officially. It was a temporary administrative holding suite. That's what the brass called rooms without windows, where time had no direction and the air smelled faintly of recycled disinfectant. Evelyn Reed sat in the center, hands resting on the metal table. No cuffs, no visible guards. Just 4 white walls and a humming vent that never shut off. She'd been here for 18 hours, maybe more. They'd taken her watch, her comms, even the small photograph from her jacket pocket. Time existed only as the slow rhythm of her heartbeat. She didn't resist when they brought her in. She'd seen this process before, from the other side of the glass. Containment wasn't about answers, it was about patience. They'd let her sit until silence started pressing against her skin. It hadn't yet. Not quite. She closed her eyes, counted breaths. In 4. Out 4. Every inhale a small reminder that control was something you could build, even here. When the door opened, it was without ceremony. Agent Rain stepped inside, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. His face held the wear of sleepless hours, but his tone was almost conversational. "Major Reed," he said softly, pulling out a chair, "you haven't asked for anything, food, water, counsel." "I'm fine." He sat opposite her, folding his hands. You know, that's the first thing every operator says. Then they break in 48 hours. You'll be no different. She tilted her head slightly. Maybe not, but I've already been broken once. It loses its novelty. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to decide whether she was dangerous or tragic. Tell me about Kandahar, he said. Her breath paused, not long enough to notice, unless you were trained to read micro-movements. So he noticed. There's nothing to tell, she replied. There's always something to tell. He leaned forward. We pulled fragments of a classified project log, Operation Sundown. That name ring a bell. She didn't answer. Here, what confuses me, he continued. You were listed as a communications specialist attached to Captain Aaron Lake's team, yet the reports after the ambush mark you as casualty, presumed KIA. And then you reappear 3 months later under a new clearance, new designation. Phantom. How does that happen? She looked down at the table, tracing an invisible line with her fingertip. You already know how. You read the file. Files tell versions, he said. I want the truth. The truth, she almost smiled. The truth is whatever the classified stamp says it is. Rains sighed. You think this is about bureaucracy. It is. This is about containment. You were sent to Sheridan because you're the last living link to something the department buried 2 decades ago. He watched her reaction carefully. None came. Let me guess, she said quietly. You don't even know what you're containing. He smiled thinly. Maybe not, but someone believes you still remember more than you should. She met his gaze. And what if I do? Then, Major, he said, lowering his voice, I need to understand why you haven't said anything for 20 years. Silence. The hum of the vent filled the space. The smell of stale air grew heavier. Finally she spoke, almost a whisper, because saying it once cost 6 lives. Rains leaned back, watching her eyes. What happened? Her focus drifted to the far wall. The paint cracked where moisture had crept in. She spoke slowly, each word measured. Lake's team was running a test, psychological operations. They built a field transmitter meant to project false communications into hostile bands. But it wasn't ready. The prototype overloaded and broadcast on every local channel. It didn't just transmit, it looped our own encrypted commands. Our allies heard them. They thought we'd turned. Chaos followed, 2 days of fire, friendly and not. When it was over, half the region was ash. Her voice wavered, not in volume but in weight. Command called it an accident, then they erased it. Rain's expression softened for the first time. And Aaron Lake. He tried to shut it down. He stayed behind when the array melted. I thought he died there. But last night, I saw his name in a system that shouldn't exist. He's either alive or they're using him as a ghost to scare me quiet. Rains nodded slowly, absorbing it. That's what you think Sundown is, a cover for that event. I don't think, she said. I know. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table. You realize that what you're implying constitutes criminal allegations against the Department of Defense, possibly the Joint Chiefs themselves. She didn't respond. He sighed again. You know, people think silence is strength. Sometimes it's just fear in uniform. Her eyes lifted, sharp. You think fear keeps people quiet? No, Agent. Guilt does. The kind that doesn't end when the mission does. For a heartbeat, the room felt smaller. He looked at her and saw not arrogance, not defiance, but exhaustion, the kind that lived under the skin. He stood. You'll stay here until we verify your account, maybe longer. She didn't move. You can lock me in any room you want, she said softly, but you can't contain what's already spread. He paused, studying her. Spread. She didn't answer. When he left, the lock clicked with finality. She sat still for a while, eyes fixed on the blank wall. Then she whispered to no one, You said the mission isn't about who wins, Aaron. It's about who you become. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. It startled her. the sound of emotion she hadn't heard from herself in years. She pressed her palms flat on the table, grounding herself in the cold steel. She told him only half the truth. The array in Kandahar hadn't just transmitted, it had recorded. Every word, every scream, every confession that followed the friendly fire. And the data had vanished until now. That was what sundown really was, an attempt to recover or erase the record. She closed her eyes and listened. Beneath the hum of the vent there was another sound, barely audible, a click, then a faint whisper of static. Someone was listening. She leaned forward slightly, speaking in a voice low enough that only a sensitive microphone could catch it. "You're wasting time," she murmured. "If you're going to erase me, at least listen long enough to understand why I stayed silent." She waited, letting the pause stretch. "Because if people knew what that signal did to us," she whispered, "they'd never trust orders again." The vent kept humming, the static ceased, but she knew they'd heard her. Hours passed. The overhead light dimmed slightly, night or something meant to imitate it. Her body ached from stillness, yet her mind wouldn't rest. She replayed Rain's face, the tremor when he mentioned higher authority. He wasn't the villain. He was a messenger like so many before him, serving a system that punished curiosity. She thought of Chun, of his promise to keep things quiet. If he realized what was coming, he'd try to intervene. And that meant he'd become a target too. She rose, stretching slowly, deliberately. The walls seemed closer now. She touched the small seam near the door, the faint buzz of current beneath her fingertips. Containment protocols were efficient, but she was designed to survive them. Still, for the first time in years, she felt something deeper than caution, something dangerously human. Doubt. Not about the mission, not even about the truth, but about herself. Had she become so practiced at silence that she'd forgotten how to fight for sound? She sat again, elbows on the table, hands folded, eyes closed. The thought came softly, almost like prayer. Maybe this is the cost of strength, the slow erosion of voice until only duty speaks for you. Somewhere far above, thunder rumbled again. Or maybe it was engines. It was hard to tell underground. She smiled faintly, the first genuine emotion to reach her face in days. "Maybe they're right," she murmured. "Maybe I did become a ghost." Then quieter still, "But ghosts remember." And with that she waited, not for rescue, but for the inevitable next door to open, knowing that whatever came through it would decide not just the mission, but the meaning of all her silence. The light above her never turned off. That was the trick of containment, to make time blur until you stopped fighting it. She had counted her heartbeats for the first hour. After that, she just breathed, slowly, deliberately, like a diver conserving air in deep water. When the door opened again, it wasn't with the practiced authority of guards. It was softer this time, hesitant. Agent Rain stepped in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. No suit jacket, no tablet, just fatigue, plain and human. He set 1 cup down in front of her. "It's not great," he said, "but it's hot." Evelyn didn't move to touch it. "You're not supposed to bring that." "Yeah," he said with a tired shrug, sitting across from her. "I'm not supposed to do a lot of things." For a long moment neither spoke. The hum of the vent filled the silence, same as before, but the air between them was different now, less hostile, more uncertain. Rains rubbed his eyes, the way people do when they've stared at something too long and still don't understand it. "You've been through a lot of interrogations, haven't you?" She gave a small, quiet smile, enough to know this isn't one. He nodded slowly. "No, not anymore." He sipped the coffee, wincing. "You ever wonder why we build places like this? Windowless rooms, constant light. It's not just control, it's to convince ourselves we're in charge of the truth." She studied him. "You sound like someone who's starting to doubt his orders." He gave a dry laugh. "You'd be surprised how often that happens in my line of work. The good ones start doubting, the bad ones start enjoying. She watched him closely. Which one are you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in the chair, staring at the wall as if trying to see something through it. When I joined internal oversight, I thought I was helping keep the system clean. You know, rooting out corruption, maintaining integrity. But somewhere along the line, we stopped protecting truth and started protecting narrative. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. That's what this is then, protecting narrative. He looked at her, tired but honest. You embarrassed a general, you drew eyes, and eyes lead to questions. The higher-ups don't like questions, especially ones that reach too far back. Her voice softened. You read the file, didn't you? He hesitated. Most of it. Then you know what we lost, what they made us do. He nodded. You think that Project Sundown was more than an experiment gone wrong? I don't think, she said quietly. I remember. Something in her tone, steady, almost sorrowful, made him look away. He took another sip of coffee and set the cup down with a quiet thud. Do you know why I asked about Kandahar yesterday? He said. Because you already knew the answer. He smiled faintly. Not quite. I wanted to see how much you'd give me before you realized I wasn't your enemy. And what did you learn? That you're not my enemy either. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That's a dangerous thing to say in your position. I know. They sat in silence again, the hum of the light filling the space between sentences. Rains finally spoke, his voice lower now. They told me you were unpredictable, that you'd do anything to protect classified data, even kill for it if necessary. And what do you think? He looked at her, long and searching. I think you've spent your whole life protecting people who didn't deserve it. For a brief moment she looked away. Something flickered in her expression, not pride, not anger, just fatigue. You think it's that simple, she asked softly, that it's about who deserves what? He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Isn't it? She shook her head slowly. No, it's about who survives what. Her words hung heavy. Rains let them settle before he spoke again. You said something yesterday about silence being guilt, not fear. She nodded once. I've been thinking about that, he said. You were right. Silence protects the wrong people. Sometimes, she said, but it also protects the right ones, the ones who can't afford to be heard. Like you. Her gaze dropped to the table, like what's left of me. For a moment, Rains forgot protocol entirely. He saw her not as a subject, not as a mission, but as a person, one who had carried entire wars inside her and still stood. He spoke softly. You ever think about leaving, walking away from all this? She almost laughed, but there was no joy in it. Where would I go? People like me don't leave. We fade out of the system one line at a time until we're just initials in a file no one opens anymore. Maybe that's what they want, he said. She looked up. Maybe, but I've learned something. What's that? Even ghosts can haunt the living. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. You sound like a poet. I'm just tired. He nodded. I know that kind of tired. For the first time, Evelyn reached for the coffee. The heat against her palms felt strange, almost foreign. She took a small sip, grimaced, and set it down. Awful, she said. He chuckled quietly. Told you. The small, human sound broke something in the room. The rigid frame of interrogation replaced by something resembling conversation. After a while, Rains spoke again, his tone hesitant. You're right about one thing. The order came from above, too far above for me to question, but there's something off about it. She waited. The authorization code, it's not one of ours. It's a joint command tag, but it's 20 years old. Same signature that triggered the containment directive in Kandahar. Evelyn froze. You're sure? He nodded. It's been copied through multiple hands, but the root trace is identical. She felt her pulse quicken, though her face stayed calm. Then it wasn't just a cover-up, it's ongoing. That's what scares me, he said quietly. If they're still using those codes, it means the project never ended. It evolved. Evelyn leaned back, the edges of her mind racing through possibilities, the transmissions, the strange data from the base, the message on the console. They're testing again. Raines's voice dropped to a whisper. You think they'll use you to finish it? I think they already are. He looked down at the table, hands tightening into fists. You realize if I report this conversation, both of us disappear. I know, she said, and if you do, then I have to live with what I've heard. She met his eyes. Living with the truth is the hardest assignment there is. Something unspoken passed between them. Not alliance, not yet, but understanding. He exhaled. You want out of here. She didn't answer, but the silence was enough. He stood slowly. Give me time, I'll see what I can do. Raines, she said quietly, stopping him at the door. He turned. Why help me? He thought about it for a long moment, then said, because I started to wonder what it costs to be the person holding the key. He left without another word. The lock clicked shut, but this time it didn't sound final. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, eyes closing for the first time in hours. She could still hear the hum of the lights, the vent, the faint echo of footsteps fading down the hall. For the first time since she'd arrived, she allowed herself to feel something that had nothing to do with strategy or survival. Hope, fragile, flickering, but alive. It terrified her more than any interrogation. Because hope meant there was still something left to lose. He didn't come back for 2 days. In containment, 2 days might as well be years. The air changed flavor, the silence grew personality. The hum of the vent became something alive, whispering, mocking, measuring. Evelyn stopped sleeping. She sat cross-legged on the floor, back against the wall, eyes open to the endless white light. Somewhere in the ceiling, a camera blinked red every 6 seconds. She started counting the intervals just to remind herself that time still existed. When the door finally opened, she didn't look up. Major. Raine's voice tired, rougher this time. She lifted her eyes. He looked different, unshaven, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He carried no files, no coffee, just a small drive and a look that didn't belong to a man following orders anymore. Stand up, he said quietly. She did, slow and deliberate. He handed her the drive. You said you wanted the truth. That's everything I could pull before they noticed. She turned it over in her hand, recognizing the military encryption pattern burned into the casing. You broke protocol. Yeah, he said, it's kind of contagious. She almost smiled. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You were right. The project never ended. It was rebranded, folded into psychological warfare research. They call it Econet now. Synthetic information broadcast through civilian networks, not enemies this time. Citizens. Her stomach turned. Conditioning. Behavioral calibration, emotional profiling, subconscious manipulation through mass data feeds. He looked up at her. They're testing it right now on a domestic scale. She stared at him, the weight of it pressing against her ribs. And they used your clearance to hide it. He nodded, and yours to validate it. The silence that followed was heavier than any interrogation. She looked down at the drive again. If this gets out, it'll burn everything. I know. Then why bring it to me? He took a long breath. Because somewhere between the orders and the truth, I forgot what my uniform meant. You reminded me. She studied his face. There was no calculation in his eyes, only fatigue, the kind that comes from choosing conscience over safety. What happens now? She asked quietly. They'll know I accessed the archives. I'm flagged already. Then you should leave. He shook his head. I can buy you a few hours, maybe less. She hesitated, looking at the door. You're serious. I wouldn't be standing here if I was. He moved closer, his voice lowering. There's a maintenance exit 2 levels down. It connects to the old comms tunnels from before the expansion. You can get out through there. Once you're clear, find Colonel Chun. He still thinks you're being processed at Quantico. She nodded once. And you? I'll stay, he said. Someone has to make this look official long enough for you to disappear. There was a pause, too long, too heavy. Rains, she said softly, you don't owe me this. He met her eyes. Maybe not, but I owe myself something, a line I don't cross. This is it. Her throat tightened, but she kept her composure. You'll lose everything. He gave a tired smile. Maybe that's the point. The door alarm chirped softly, a signal that he'd bypassed the security loop. He handed her an access badge. Go, he whispered. She didn't move. For a moment, neither of them did. Then she reached out, not a handshake, not a salute, just a hand on his arm, steady, grateful. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Don't make me regret it. Then she was gone. The corridors beyond were quiet, painted in dull green light from the emergency strips. Every step echoed like a countdown. She passed storage rooms, sealed offices, and old machinery covered in dust. Somewhere behind her, alarms would soon begin. She didn't hurry. Haste drew attention. Precision survived. The maintenance door opened into a narrow stairwell leading down into concrete tunnels, relics from the Cold War, never decommissioned. Water dripped from rusted pipes, echoing through the silence. She moved like she had all her life, quiet, deliberate, invisible. At the bottom, she found the old comms chamber. The equipment was dead, coated in grime, but she knew what she needed wasn't power, it was isolation. She inserted the drive into an old terminal and waited. The screen flickered, lines of encrypted code scrolling until the words appeared. Access authorized, ECHONET Core FILES. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She could release it. She could send every file, every truth to the outside world. She could burn the system down. But then she remembered the faces, not the generals, not the agents. The young soldiers who still believed the uniform meant honor. The civilians who wouldn't understand the fire that would follow. She closed her eyes. This wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility. She typed one command instead. Archive encryption enabled. Secondary access, Colonel CHUN. Then she pressed Enter. The data locked itself away under a code only 2 people could break. She wouldn't release it, not yet, but it wouldn't die either. It would wait, just like she had. Footsteps echoed from above, distant, frantic. They discovered the breach. She removed the drive, wiped her fingerprints from the terminal, and moved back into the stairwell. Her body ached, but her steps were steady. By the time the alarms began to blare, she was already outside, breathing in real air for the first time in days. The sun had broken through the clouds, pale, cold light over wet concrete. She didn't run, she walked. The world didn't know her name, and maybe it never would. But somewhere behind her, the machine had stuttered, just enough for one truth to survive. As she reached the forest edge, her comm earpiece crackled. A voice faint, almost lost to static. Phantom, this is Watchtower. Signal received. Safe channel confirmed. Status. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Operational, she whispered. Static again, then silence. She looked up at the sky. For the first time in years, it felt vast, not as something to fly through or fight under, but simply exist beneath. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. The weight was still there, it would always be, but now it had shape, name, direction. Behind her, somewhere in that windowless facility, Rains was being confronted. She could almost hear it, the calm voice of authority asking for explanations, the soft click of a door sealing shut. He would take the blame, she knew. Maybe he'd be erased, maybe not, but his choice would echo louder than any report. Because sometimes, The smallest act of defiance wasn't rebellion, it was remembrance. Evelyn reached into her pocket, feeling the smooth edge of the drive she'd kept, a duplicate Rains hadn't known about. Not to use, just to hold. A reminder. She turned toward the horizon, where the morning mist was lifting over the distant hills. Each step felt quieter than the last, until her figure became another shadow in the light. No medals, no ceremony, no victory speech. Just dignity, quiet, absolute, unbroken. The voiceover would fade here, over a slow, rising note of strings, low, solemn, reflective. And the final line would come like a whisper through static. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.